Hello, I thought I'd come here today and talk to you about two of my favourite things, which happen to be ocean and space. So, here's a picture of ocean and space combined, to let you know why I want to come here and talk to you about ocean and space. I trained as an oceanographer, and I spent a lot of time going out on boats and measuring the sea. And then I switched to teaching, and I became a physics teacher and astronomy teacher. This is me on a strike when the school cuts first came in. I'm a Ghostbuster. And for the last 2 years, I've been combining these two things together and been going into schools, sometimes dressed as a pirate with a life-size inflatable killer whale, and talking to people about the sea and supporting the science curriculum. And the more and more I went into schools, I just realised, actually, that we don't actually know that much about the oceans. We know what about the sea. I was having a game of children's Trivial Pursuit in a pub, and I was with my friends, and the question came up, what were the first men on the moon? And I was like, oh, this is really easy, they're going to get this right. And what they actually said was Lance Armstrong and Buzz Lightyear. And I was like, amazing, okay. Well, what we actually know is they are these guys. We've got Neil Armstrong, we've got Buzz Aldrin. The guy in the middle is kind of a lesser-known guy that we don't know, but still really important in the Apollo 11 missions. This guy's called Mike Collins, and he holds the record for being the loneliest person that there has ever been. It was his job to orbit the moon, while the other two guys walked around on it and got all the credit. And it was his job to rendezvous with the lunar module again to take them back to Earth. But it would take him 2 hours to orbit the moon, and 45 minutes in every 2 hours meant he was on the far side of the moon and out of contact with the rest of the human race. Thus, he gets the moniker the loneliest man ever. So, if we look at this incredible graph, which I've formulated, of people what have been there, if we look at how many people have been to space, we've got 536 people there. People that have been to the moon, that's 24. We've got 12 people walk on it, and the rest of them have orbited it. And then we look at the people that have been to the deepest point on Earth, at the bottom of our ocean. We've got a whopping 3 people, which is, I think, absolutely unbelievable. And I was like, why is this? Why is it that so many people have gone to space, so few have gone to the bottom of our ocean? And this is what I've started to research and start to look at as to why there's this massive discrepancy. So we kind of used to thinking, oh yeah, the sea, we can go diving, we can go swimming all over the place. And if you're scuba diving, you have proper equipment, you have a good gas mix, you can go down to about 500 meters maximum. And if you go down in one of these snazzy suits, this is an atmospheric diving suit, then you can go down to about 700 meters. If you're on a submarine in World War II, you'd be able to go down to about 280 meters, and any deeper than that, if pressure would exceed that, what your submarine could be capable of withstanding, it would be crushed, and you'd sink to the bottom and die, a little bit like in Das Boot. And the current record for deep diving nuclear submarines and naval submarines is the Seawater class in the States, which can go down to about 730 meters. So I've got here a little slice through the ocean, a cross-section here. And we can see, actually, that when we used to think of going really deep, 730 meters is really deep, but we are only scratching the surface. So if most naval submarines can only go down to about that depth, and then we've got the average ocean depth, 3,500 meters, we're not even going anywhere near that. And that's not when we start, that's when we start to look at the deepest point on Earth, the Challenger Deep, the Marianas Trench. And this is a point 11 kilometers underwater, a place so dark and so dangerous that only 3 people have ever been there. So at the height of the space race, we have these guys, a Swiss person called Jacques Piccard, and an American guy called Don Walsh, and they built this submarine called the Trieste. And it looks pretty big, but they're actually squeezed into that small circle, that sphere at the bottom of it. While they went down, the rest of the craft was filled with ballast and air tanks to help them get down and come back up again. And they did this, and it was kind of like just ticked off the list. Well, hey, we've gone to the bottom. Let's see if we don't have to worry about doing that again. No one did it again until James Cameron, a film director, used his money that he got from all of his incredible films, like Terminator 2, Aliens, Avatar, Titanic, and he built his own $8 million submarine. And he became the 3rd person ever to reach the deepest point on Earth. Which is a crazy idea. 3 people, only 3 people. So we're thinking like, oh, well, that's quite a lot, 8 million. But then if we look at what it takes to get to these different environments, it actually takes quite a lot. This is a picture of the Saturn V rocket, and it is an incredible piece of machinery. I was lucky enough to go see it at the Kennedy Space Center a couple of years ago. And one of the things that's quite often overlooked is this thing that wheels it out there, and this is the crawler transporter, an incredible piece of kit. And you can see there with the picture of the car and the little people next to it how big this thing is. And it has a top speed of 1 mile an hour and an amazing fuel efficiency of 13 meters per gallon. So the prices I've put on here, I've changed to pounds because we're in England, and I've modernised them to their modern day equivalent. So that's how much just the thing to wheel the rocket out costs. And then when we look at the rocket itself, this is an incredible thing, 2.6 billion per rocket. That is mainly fuel, just to get the tiny little top bit into outer space. And this giant fuel canister, which is what it effectively is, has got a whopping fuel efficiency of 18 centimetres per gallon, which makes its world record being the worst fuel efficiency on Earth. Incredible. But that is some serious technology to go into outer space. And this is why, because the moon is quite far away from Earth. You don't often see it portrayed like this, but this is a scale picture of if the Earth was that big, this is how big the moon would be in comparison, and that is 240,000 miles. It takes quite a while to get to the moon. It takes approximately 2 days to get into lunar orbit, but then they had to orbit for another 2 days before they were able to land on the moon itself. And that was the fastest anyone has done it. This is the Apollo 11, and subsequent missions did it in a much slower time. So we're like, okay, well obviously it's harder to get into space, we need expensive stuff, you know, submarines just go down, and it's easier to get to the moon. Is it? No, I don't know. Let's find out. So when we look at submarines, we're like, okay, so maybe the temperature plays a role in that. So if this is James Cameron hanging out in his submarine, and he wants it at a nice balmy 24 degrees centigrade, room temperature, and we look at the temperature extremes that we get in the ocean. The warmest the ocean will be 27 degrees, the coldest it will be -2. You could say that if you go down to some seismically active areas where we've got hydrothermal vents, the water in that can be up to 600 degrees centigrade. But I'm discounting that because you'd be silly to drive your submarine into that, really. In outer space, we've got a completely different thing going on here. And this is probably one of the biggest challenges of space travel, is that if you're trying to keep your nice 24 degrees centigrade room temperature inside your spaceship, the depths of space are only 3 degrees above absolute zero, which is almost the coldest temperature that you can possibly get. But it means that the side facing the sun has got no atmosphere, so that gets insanely hot. And so this massive temperature difference between the two means that anything you engineer to put into outer space has got to be able to withstand these extreme temperatures. So then I was like, I know what's going to be the cincher, and that is going to be the pressure. So if I get a balloon and I blow that balloon up, and currently that balloon and all of us are at atmospheric pressure. We've got 1 atmosphere of pressure pressing down on us, all that weight of air. We don't feel it because we have evolved with it. But just 10 meters underwater, that pressure doubles because water is so much denser than air. So just 10 meters underwater, I'm exposed to 2 atmospheres of pressure. So I would take my balloon down that deep, the volume of that balloon would go to half of what it would be on the surface. If I take it down another 10 meters to 20 meters underwater, and now I'm under 3 atmospheres of pressure, and the volume of the balloon would be compressed to a third of what it is on the surface. 40-meter mark is really important for people that do free diving, because at that depth, your lungs get compressed to the size of your fists, and you stop being neutrally buoyant. So if you sink any deeper than that, you actually have to expend energy to swim back up, so your lungs can then start expanding and you can float to the surface. Any deeper than that, you sink like a stone. So this idea of pressure plays quite a big role. And we've only looked at it in terms of like 40, 50 meters. And if we start looking at the point in the Marianas Trench, where you are going to have 11,000 meters of water pressing down on you, the pressure there is absolutely unbelievable. So what we're going to do is we're going to imagine a cube of water, and this is fresh water, so the cube of water, it weighs approximately a ton. Seawater weighs a little bit more, at about 1,030 kilograms because of the salt. And if we imagine a giant stack of these cubes, one on top of the other, one on top of the other, building up and building up for 11,000 meters, you can imagine on that square that we're going to have 11,000 tons pressing down on that square meter. And what that translates to is if I were to draw a little centimetre by centimetre box on my hand, on every centimetre squared of my body, I'd have over a tonne pressing down on me, which is an absolutely mental amount of pressure. It's such a massive amount of pressure that had Jacques Picard, had Don Walsh, James Cameron, had their submarines got a hole in it, then the water would have sprayed in with as much pressure they would have been able to cut them in half like a laser beam. And if their submarine had failed and the water had gone in all at one go, they would have been turned to a human smoothie in less than a second. Just a great big cloud of blood and guts. You wouldn't even feel a thing. So, in outer space, pressure is much, much easier because you've just got to keep 1 atmosphere in versus that 0 atmospheres that you've got outside. So you've just got a pressure differential of 1 atmosphere. You have got the same pressure differential in your submarine underwater at just 10 metres underwater there. You've got 1 atmosphere you're keeping in, you've got 2 atmospheres on the outside. So there's our 1 atmosphere in, there's our 2 on the outside. And every 10 metres you go down underwater, that pressure is increasing and increasing. And this is one of the reasons that it is so insanely difficult to get to the deep ocean because of this pressure thing. So then, we're going to see what it's like to live in these places. So this is an incredible, one of mankind's most amazing feats. It's the International Space Station, a collaborative international project where scientists can go up there and use this and do experiments about how mankind can hopefully potentially visit places further in space than the moon. This thing cost $15 billion and it is absolutely amazing. But one of the dangers in outer space we don't often think about is how radioactive space is. So we have got a giant star right near us, our sun, and this sun is constantly spewing out charged particles of radiation. We don't notice them down here on Earth because we have an atmosphere to protect us, but we know when these things hit our Earth because that's what causes the auroras at the North and the South Poles. This is when these charged particles interact with our atmosphere and our magnetosphere. But as these particles are firing through space, without the protection of the atmosphere in outer space, astronauts are constantly bombarded by these charged particles. To the point when they're trying to go to sleep, they see flashes of light on their retinas from the radioactive particles going through their eyes and impacting upon their retinas. And so for this reason, because space is so radioactive, typically, NASA doesn't allow astronauts up into space longer than 6 months because of the long-term health effects. And so these long-term health effects from being bombarded by all this radiation can include things like cataracts. It can really affect your eyes. We can have things like an increased risk of cancer. That makes sense. But also, the microgravity environment plays havoc with the human body as well. So we have, gradually, our bones start deteriorating and wasting away because they're not having to support anything. And as our bones start breaking down, we get kidney stones as they're trying to process that. We've got other things such as muscle loss. Astronauts have to train up to 4 hours a day to try and reduce the fact that their muscles aren't being used as much. Our heart does weird things in space because it's used to pumping blood round against gravity, and then all of a sudden we start getting irregular heartbeats and things like that. We've got messes around with our blood, and we become anemic, things like that. Completely messes around with our circadian rhythms. An astronaut will orbit the Earth every 90 minutes, so there's no concept really of night and day there. And it also messes around with your muscular coordination, your hand-eye coordination, but people are still unsure as to why that happens. So living in space is quite hazardous for your health, and to this point, the longest anyone's ever spent in space is 420 days, which was a record set by a Russian cosmonaut back in 1995, a guy called Valery Polikarpov. So this is the equivalent down here on Earth. This is the underwater version of the ISS. This is called Aquarius, and this is the last remaining undersea laboratory. It's in a whopping 20 meters underwater. And funding was cut for it in 2014, and luckily the University of Florida stepped up its game and took over the facility. And this is currently where a lot of our underwater research is being carried out. So currently, the world record for living in this underwater facility is 31 days. Whoa. Because living underwater is actually a really, really horrible experience. So again, if we look at what goes on to people when they live in a pressurized environment underwater for a prolonged period of time, all kinds of really strange things happen that you wouldn't normally think. And the main problem that all aquanauts moan about is the fact you just can't get dry. Everything is wet. The atmosphere is 100% humidity. Water drips off absolutely everything. Everything turns moldy, and it drives them absolutely crazy. So as a result, infections arrive. Things like getting horrible ear infections. If you get a cut, then that can go septic really, really easily because things just aren't dry. And as a result, you get nappy rash. Your clothes are wet on you and they rub on you. And this is having to live for a month with a nappy rash. I think that just sounds horrific. But you also get really bad skin. You get acne plays up because of the pressurized atmosphere and because of this moisture. But then you're not getting your sunlight, so you start getting reduced vitamin D, you'll become very pale, and it's a little bit depressing. But then breathing in this pressurized atmosphere the whole time does strange things as well. A lot of aquanauts report a loss of taste and a loss of smell, and they don't know whether this is because of the increase in pressure air that they're having to breathe, or whether it's because of the humid atmosphere. Nitrogen narcosis sounds like quite a good fun thing. If anyone's ever been scuba diving, when you breathe nitrogen in under pressure, it actually causes you to get drunk. And so a lot of people who visit this facility comment on the fact that everyone's just walking around basically insanely drunk the whole time, just giggling and in a very euphoric state. So we also get this thing called pulmonary toxicity, where from breathing pressurized air for a prolonged period of time, it actually damages your lungs. And then we've got decompression sickness, which is commonly called the bends. And so if one of them were to just leave that pressurized environment without decompressing and go up to the surface, they would get air bubbles forming, nitrogen bubbles forming in their blood, which can cause blockages. You can get blood bursting out of your tear ducts in your nose, and it can cause brain aneurysms. So really, really nasty. And so that's one of the reasons why going and living underwater for a prolonged period of time is worse than it is in outer space. But then you've got the seawater itself, which is insanely corrosive. Two metals put together. This is mild steel and stainless steel put side by side. And it sets up an electrolytic cell. It sets up a battery, and the less reactive metal will stay, and the more reactive metal will start fizzing away until the things just fall to pieces. And for this reason, that's why shipwrecks start rusting away really quickly. We don't have shipwrecks much older than 50, 60 years because they start dissolving into the sea. Conversely, up in outer space, we've got satellites that were put there in the 1970s and are still working to this day with hardly any maintenance at all. So the ocean is a very unforgiving place. So I thought, okay, so let's look at the money that's spent in these two environments. So I'm going to compare the budget in the blue corner for the National Oceanographic and Atmosphere Administration in the United States versus NASA, which is the National Aeronautic and Space Administration. And so what I've done is I've calibrated this. So this wodge of money, that's approximately $20 million. Okay, so that's roughly what is spent on exploration in both of these organisations. So for atmospheres and oceans, to explore those two environments, we've got $20 million, which sounds like quite a lot. And when we compare it to NASA, each one of these is $20 million. So I'd just like to comment on that amazing PowerPoint animation, just saying that. We've got quite a lot of money which is going towards space exploration there. And I think that is one of the biggest problems, is that we are just not investing in going to explore our oceans. And this is a really strange idea because we live on a blue planet. We call it planet Earth. It should really be called planet water. And this is a picture of the Pacific. And it's incredible. If we look at the surface area of the Earth, 29% of it is covered by land and 71% of it is covered in water, which is absolutely mental. But that is looking at it from a humanistic point of view, and that's just looking at the surface. What we need to think about is the fact that the oceans are three-dimensional, and if they're on average 3.5 kilometres deep, we need to start looking at the oceans not as a thin layer, but as a deep, thick layer in 3 dimensions. And then if we look at our Earth in terms of habitable space, Then, habitable space on this planet, 1% of it is land, and 99% of it is ocean in terms of habitable space. We have currently explored 5% of our ocean, which means that we don't know what is in 94% of our own planet, which is an insane idea when we're already trying to send people to Mars when we don't even know what we've got here on Earth. So I'm going to leave you now with a quote from a TED Talk from 2005. This is a guy called Graham Hawkes. He is a submarine engineer. He was talking about redesigning submarines. And he had this, I just thought I'd just be paraphrasing him if I made up and tried to say something. He said it in a very eloquent fashion. And what he said was, "We're throwing billions of dollars into the void and ignoring a rich frontier much closer to home, Earth's oceans. They're awash with unknown life, unclaimed territory, and immense natural resources. Perhaps the future of mankind isn't out in space, but in our sea." And he summed that up much more succinctly when he said, "Your rockets are pointed in the wrong goddamn direction." Thank you.